45 years, 0 name changes, new offices, more staff, improved technology to better serve you. Education, services, investments. Think real estate, think Marshall Reddick. Brokerage, property management, private lending, creating financial independence through real estate since 1979.
This evening, I am looking forward to going over our 1031 presentation tonight. 1031s are a huge part of our business and such a important role in the investment real estate space. And while I know sometimes they seem kind of daunting and there's a lot to them, it's really nice when you have a professional like we're going to be able to bring up tonight to be able to go over that in more detail and kind of work through all of those components. It definitely makes the process a lot smoother. And it's really exciting to learn the savings that 1031 exchanges can offer. So, for those of you newer to Marshall Reddick, it is always great for us to partner with some of our most trusted advisors. We have Excel 1031 here with Aristotle that I'll be introducing shortly. But yeah, just wanted to kind of give everybody a warm welcome and thank everybody for taking some time to join us this evening. My name is Vince Tomich. I'm an advisor and realtor here at Marshall Reddick. I've been with the company now for coming up on 7 years. I work out of our Newport Beach office. My background prior to being an agent and advisor here was I was in residential lending, and I found myself more interested in the personal investment space and purchasing property and becoming an owner. Then I was kind of focused on the lending space that I should have been in. So I found a pretty natural transition in working with Marshall Reddick and helping other like-minded investors seek out those opportunities. And it's been a great opportunity. And it all started actually just from an event like this. I started attending online presentations and in-person presentations and found more and more value with the company and ended up working full time. So yeah, that's a little bit more about myself. For those of you that are less familiar with Marshall Reddick, I just kind of like to give a map of kind of our brick and mortar locations where you can find us from a brokerage standpoint, from a property management standpoint. So as I mentioned, I'm here in our Newport Beach office, but we have offices in Los Angeles. We have 5 offices in Texas. We have Nashville, Clarksville, and then also in Cape Coral, Florida. So quite a bit of diversity there and quite a bit of options for those that are seeking 1031 exchanges, whether it's a purchase, a sale, or have existing properties in this market and you may need management. I kind of touched on some of this, but like I said, those of you that are unfamiliar with Marshall Reddick, we function as a full service real estate firm. I would say the easiest way to describe us is we have 4 different sectors of our business. We have our brokerage, so helping people buy and sell, whether that's a primary residence or an investment property. We also have property management. So 99% of the folks that end up buying real estate with us, investment property that is, you would need property management services. And that previous slide showed the map of where we can offer those services. We're also a private money lender. So not like your traditional conventional lender that's looking at your income and your DTI. We're an asset-based lender. This is going to be more for renovation loans, short-term bridge loans. Some people call it hard money. So that's another scenario we offer, or another, I should say, service we offer. And on the flip side to that, we offer the opportunity for our investors to lend their capital. We have a mortgage fund that's up to close to 75 million now, where we're lending capital to the various loans that I just described, those fix and flip or short-term bridge loans. And you're able to be on the other side of that transaction. So instead of being an owner of real estate and collecting rent checks, you can be a part owner of our mortgage fund and lend your capital and collect mortgage payments. So for those of you that are interested in different services or just learning more about what Marshall Reddick can offer, I can always make myself available to go over any one of those in more detail. But tonight is more of a focused presentation on our 1031s. Aristotle at Excel 1031 was kind enough to join us tonight. is just a wealth of knowledge. I lean on him constantly as someone who's been in this space now for in the real estate space for over 10 years. I still come up with questions constantly, and it's so helpful to have somebody like Aristotle on the team, or at least very accessible for all of those questions. And I have had countless clients, you know, connect with him in the same way. So we're really, really pleased, and I want to welcome Aristotle to from Excel 1031.
Yeah, hey Vince, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, so I will take over here, I guess, and let's get started. So yeah, again, my name is Aristotle. I'm with Excel 1031. We are a qualified intermediary, and we will talk about what that is, because some people kind of get confused. It's the same thing as an accommodator. You might have heard that before. So let's see here. There we go. Oh. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not going to read it word for word, but basically, in essence, what this says is that, you know, I am not a tax advisor, I'm not an attorney. So any kind of legal advice or tax questions, like really specific tax questions that you have, I would highly recommend you talk to your accountant or CPA for that stuff. We know the basic tax code, but we can't give you any kind of advice on that. Vince and I and Marshall Reddick, we have several referrals for partnership referrals for CPAs and attorneys, real estate attorneys, if you need that. So. All right, sorry about that, a little slow here. So just a quick little background on myself. So I've been a licensed real estate agent since 2008. I don't practice real estate anymore, but just goes to show I've been in the industry for quite a while. I only started with investment property. Believe it or not, I can still remember my father taking me with him to collect rent on his rental properties when I was probably like 9 or 10. I had no idea what it was at the time, but I guess it just stuck with me, and I just had a lot of interest in it. I attended the University of Missouri, St. Louis. That's where I grew up. I've been in the investing industry for 16 years now, actually a little bit longer than that. I have been investing myself since 2014. I am in several of the markets that Marshall Reddick is recommending. So I'm diversified, primarily on single family homes, but they're long-term buy and hold rentals for myself. I've helped lots and hundreds of investors, lots of investors with exchanges. And I'm really passionate about educating investors and talking about not just 1031, but like just learning about what you're looking to do. And I have the same goals as what Marshall Reddick and what Vince and his company are aligned on. And just I really love helping people. Personal information. I'm a father to a 9-year-old son, almost 10 now, is great, and I love to travel. I've been to 16 countries. Hopefully by the end of next year, I will be at 20. So. All right, so this is the 1031 exchange code. If you've never seen it before, I won't read this word for word because it is a little boring and dry, but basically in essence what it says is that if you have a property that's being used for investment, business, or trade purposes, you can sell that property and you can exchange it into a like-kind property, which we'll talk about what that is. And as long as you're exchanging that property into another property that's being used for investment, business, or trade purposes, then there'll be no capital gain. You can defer that. Vince, are we having any kind of issue here? Technical issue? I'm not sure what happened to the slide here. Saying something about batteries low. Oh, can you hear me?
Yep, we should be okay. 1 second.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Okay, thank you. All right, so what is a qualified intermediary? So a QI, qualified intermediary, is a neutral third party that facilitates the IRS code 1031. So it's a like-kind exchange, like I said. We hold the proceeds of the relinquished property, and we use it, and you're going to use them to purchase a replacement property. So we're kind of like a middleman, if you want to call us that. But it says here, by using the QI, you do have to use a qualified intermediary. Then the taxpayer avoids receiving the funds directly. Once you receive the funds from escrow into your personal account, you can no longer do a 1031 exchange. So this has to be lined up before you close escrow. So, but we manage the documents, make sure you're following the guidelines. We educate you beforehand, and all that stuff. So we just want to make sure that you have a very smooth transaction when you're doing your exchange. So here are some topics we're going to cover today. Some reasons to do 1031 exchange. I think some people already know some of those, but we'll talk a little bit about capital gain taxes, what they are and how to calculate that. We'll talk about the types of exchanges because there are several types. Some key points to keep in mind for a successful 1031 exchange. The split treatment, that's, we actually don't have a slide on that, but I will tell you real quickly, the split treatment is where you can actually use a portion of your primary home, not investment property, but your primary home. You can use a portion of that to actually 1031 exchange. And a good example would be an ADU. So if any of you have an ADU, that could qualify for it. That portion could qualify for a 1031 exchange. Or if you have a business out of your home or you rent rooms out of your primary home, that portion of that can actually qualify for 1031. So 1031 exchange is not just for rental properties. If you do have a primary home and you have a really large gain on it, a gain on that property, then you could use a split treatment. We're going to go over some issues and solutions, and then we'll do some FAQs at the end. So that's always usually the best part. We have lots of great questions. Okay, so here are some reasons to do an exchange. The number one is to defer capital gains, right? No one wants to pay taxes. I don't want to pay any more in taxes than I have to, and I'm sure you guys don't either. That's why people do an exchange. But there are other reasons. I mean, some people want to get rid of a property that has lots of deferred maintenance. Maybe you have a really old property and it needs a new roof, a new HVAC, all this stuff. Well, what if you got rid of that and got into a new construction home, something that Marshall Reddick offers in a different market, and you can just not have to worry about that deferred maintenance. Increased buying power. So basically, instead of paying taxes, like if you didn't do a 1031 exchange, you can use those funds and basically go up if you want to a more expensive property. So let's say you had to pay $30,000 or $40,000 in taxes if you didn't do a 1031. That gives you a lot more leverage in buying another property of greater size potentially. Change property type. Maybe you have a single family home or a condo and you want to get into a duplex or a multifamily, or maybe you have a multifamily and you want to get into a medical office or something. There's lots of reasons for that too. Diversify your portfolio. Maybe you own a property here in California and you want to diversify into 2 or 3 different states because that's what would be a smart thing to do, just to diversify. Increase cash flow. Maybe you're coming up to retirement age and you're sitting on a ton of equity, but your equity is not doing anything for you other than just building up, but you want to increase cash flow. So maybe you want to exchange into stuff that's going to give you a lot more positive cash flow. Reset depreciation. So, depreciation on a single family home, or I should say residential property, is 27.5 years. So that means you can depreciate that asset for 27.5 years, but once that runs out, you can no longer take that depreciation. And so people do 1031 exchanges so they can actually start getting depreciation again. Increasing your net worth. This is basically where you are going to leverage, almost like increasing your buying power, as I spoke about, but you can actually use that to increase your net worth by going from $1 million worth of property up to $2 million, for example. And we have a slide on that we'll go over later. And then estate planning benefits, stepped up basis. So the really, really awesome thing about this is if you want to pass on your wealth to your kids, for example, I have a son, you heard, I want my son to have my assets, but maybe at some point when I pass away and he gets these assets, maybe he doesn't want to be a landlord, maybe he doesn't want to be an investor anymore, he wants to sell. Well, if he decides to sell those assets, those properties, he's not going to pay the capital gains tax that I would be paying if I were alive to sell it. He is actually going to be paying what's called a step-up basis, and he's going to be paying close to market rates on the taxes. So in essence, what that means is that he'll be paying a lot less taxes than I would be paying. So really, really cool stuff there. Okay, capital gains tax. How to calculate capital gains tax? A lot of people get this confused because they think capital gains tax is the difference between what they own the property and what they sell the property for. That's actually not true. That's what equity is, okay? So first you need to determine what your basis is. What did you buy the property for? And we're gonna go through an example here in the next slide so you can see. So you figure out what you bought the property is, think back, then you're gonna subtract depreciation. Your accountant or CPA should know what that is. It is on your tax returns every year if you're taking depreciation. And I will also tell you, if you're not taking depreciation right now, again, I'm not a legal advisor, but I would recommend you start taking depreciation because it is a big thing to consider. And IRS doesn't care if you don't take it because you still have to pay depreciation recapture tax. So then you add any capital improvements that you've done to the property, added a roof, remodel the house, kitchen, etc. And then that's going to give you what's called your adjusted basis. And if you take your net sales price, which is your relinquished sale price, subtract that from your adjusted basis, that's going to give you capital gain, and that's what your gain would be roughly. So let's see what that looks like on the next slide here. So let's say the original purchase price of a property I bought was $500,000. I depreciated $100,000 over time. I added about $25,000 worth of capital improvements, and I had a net sales price of $1 million. Let's say it sold for 1.1, and I had $100,000 in closing costs, and my net was $1 million. So let's see what that would look like. So you can see right here that my adjusted basis is $425,000. And then if I subtract that from the net sales price, you'll see my capital gain there, which is $575. That would be the actual gain that you'd be taxed on if you don't do a 1031. So if you just say, I'm just going to sell the property, you should know what your gain is. And a lot of people that come to me do know what their gain is. They've already talked to their accountant. But if you don't, we have some calculators on our website, which I think is the next slide here, which can help you. That's coming up here. But we do have a couple calculators on our website that can help you calculate what that is if you don't know. And just to break it down, Vince and I were talking about this a few days ago, and it's pretty important to really recognize the taxes. Again, capital gains taxes is broken down into 4 levels, okay? So these 4 types of taxes are going to be in what's called the capital gains taxes. The big one is the depreciation recapture tax. Okay, right now it's capped at 25%. Who knows if it's going to go up, but that's quite a bit. That's a quarter percent that you have to pay. What is depreciation recapture tax? Well, if you have or haven't been depreciating your property, you still have to pay this. So basically, in real estate, there's 2 elements of a investment property. There's the land, and then there's the structure on the land. Land never gets depreciated because it doesn't wear and tear. It doesn't wear down to nothing. IRS considers a structure in the house. Hey, this is going to wear down. The roof is going to wear down, etc. And so they let you depreciate that over time. And so if you're not taking depreciation, guess what? You still have to pay this depreciation recapture tax. I have people come up to me and they say, well, you know what? I don't need to pay depreciation recapture tax. I've never taken it. Guess what? You're wrong about that. IRS doesn't care if you didn't take it. You still have to pay it. So again, if you're not taking depreciation every year, you should really look into doing it. I do it on all my properties because you got to pay the tax anyway. Then you have federal gain tax you're going to pay. This is going to depend on what your income bracket is. Then you have net investment income tax, which is very small, and then you have your state tax. So your state tax is going to depend on if you're in California, for example. We're in a very high state tax bracket here. So if you live in California and you have a rental property that you want to sell, all in all, what it comes down to is you could be paying close to 35% in capital gains tax if you don't do a 1031 exchange. Again, depends on your income bracket, but you could be paying even up to 40%. So if you're in California, if you're not in California, I've seen 25% on average, but in California, 30 to 40% is the norm. So just keep that in mind, if you're thinking about selling and not doing a 1031.
Yeah, and Aristotle, one really good point there is, to your what you were mentioning is so common that I hear where people think, oh, if I bought the house for $1 million and I sold it $1.5 million and I'm gonna net, whatever that they're gonna net on it, that they're just paying the the capital gains on that 500 or whatever that they net. And truthfully, like the longer that you own real estate, the more depreciation that factors in. That's where I see really the biggest shock factor, because the longer you hold that property, typically the lower that adjusted basis goes, which then ultimately increases that gain. And that's where people typically get shocked on what they're gonna owe. And I know while we can't perfectly outline the exact amount because we just don't know everybody's tax brackets, etc., we can give you a good range of what to expect, and I think that's really helpful when making this consideration.
Absolutely good point. And think about this too, Vince. If you do cost segregation on your property too, that's also going to, in a shorter amount of time, that's also going to lower your basis, which could increase your gain. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, so this is our website, excel1031.com is our website. You'll see that at the end, but we have some, I mentioned earlier, some calculators here that can help you not only calculate your capital gains, but also it will break down, the different tax rates if you know that. So this is great for if you're a very technical person, but if you're not, then your accountant can usually help you with that stuff. This is a slide on our, or I should say a web page on our website of just the exchange process. 4 easy steps. I'm not going to go over everything right now, but basically preparation, exchange, replace, and then completion. So it's a cycle. We help you through all this stuff, of course, but if you want to look at this on our website, you can kind of read this and kind of get details. I have a lot of PDFs and stuff I can send to clients if they ever want more of a breakdown and technical stuff on this. All right, so let's talk about the types of exchanges. You might not realize, but there's several different types of exchanges, and depending on what you're trying to do, you're going to want to go for one of these. All right. The first one is the simultaneous exchange. That's when you're going to close on your relinquished property and close on your replacement property at the same time. Why would you want to do that and kind of like going through the painstaking, nerve-wracking event of doing that? I don't know, because there's no incentive to do it, but that's how exchanges actually were before the other types of exchanges came around. But that is a very seldom one we see, but we do see people doing it just because it just happens to fall on the same day, or maybe they're trying to do it in a rush. The most common one is the second one. That's called the delayed exchange, other known as the forward exchange. This is when you're going to close on your relinquished property, then you're going to identify and close on your replacement property. And we'll talk about the timeline here, but if you refer to the 45 days and 180 days, that's kind of what the delayed exchange is set up about. It's the most common one. I would say about 90%, 85, 90% of people do the delayed exchange. The reverse exchange is going to be backwards, where you're going to actually purchase your replacement property first, then you're going to sell and close your relinquished property. So this is great. This has been great lately for people in the market, in some markets we've been in for the last couple of years, where it's been really slow to sell a property, right? Maybe you've been trying to sell your rental property and it's just not selling, and it's taking several months to do that. If a reverse exchange makes sense, that could be a great tool for you. It's a lot more involved. There's a lot more expenses involved with it. I'm happy to go over that over the phone with anybody if they want more information on it. But it is a great tool because let's say you are it's taken a long time to sell your property, and all of a sudden Vince sends you a property that you like. For instance, like, hey, this is like the last one in this development or the last property here, and you really want to jump on it. You could purchase that one first, and then you could sell your relinquished property after that. So you have some options there. The construction improvement exchange, this is, excuse me, this is when you're going to use your exchange funds or the proceeds to make capital improvements on the property. So let's say you found a property, or it could be a warehouse or commercial or residential, and you got to rebuild the whole thing or something. You still only have 180 calendar days when you close on your relinquished property to use those funds to improve on the property. So you do have a time frame. It's not like you can just do it whenever. But that's kind of what that would be made for. And then the reverse construction exchange, this is basically when you're going to, same thing as the construction exchange, but reverse. So you're just basically going to purchase the replacement property first, and then you're going to sell your relinquished property. So just some different tactics really for people who are building properties and things like that. That's kind of what these come in handy for. All right, so some key points to keep in mind. So we're going to talk about, what qualifies for a 1031 exchange, like what kind of property, what are the 2 requirements to defer all taxes. That's actually really 3, but 2 main ones. And how much time do you have? Because people freak out when they hear the timelines, right? They're like, oh my gosh, I got to do this in 45 days. I got to identify a property. So let's dive into that real quickly. So the like-kind property. So again, the IRS code says like-kind property. And what does like-kind mean? It doesn't mean that you can sell, or that you have to purchase the same exact property that you're selling. So if you're selling a property, let's say you're selling a single family home, it doesn't mean you have to purchase a new single family home. You can purchase anything that's used for business, investment, or trade purposes. That's all you have to keep in mind. So here's some pictures here. You can buy single family homes. If you have a condo, you can buy 3 single family homes. You can buy raw land, warehouse, flex space is pretty popular nowadays, office space, multifamily property, shopping center, retail, pretty much anything, again, as long as it's going to be used for investment, business, or trade purposes. You can even buy a property that's used for a restaurant, that's being used for business. It doesn't have to be a residential property. So, and let's talk about what doesn't qualify for a 1031. So your principal residence. You cannot 1031 exchange from a rental property into a new primary home. That's not allowed. Property held for sale or dealer property, that means if you're flipping property. So unfortunately, if you're trying to flip a property or you want a 1031 into a property that you're going to flip, that does not count as a 1031 exchange. That's actually considered short-term capital gains. And then vacation or second homes. This is a little gray area because if you're going to buy a second home or a vacation home and your intention is to rent it out like a short-term rental, that's completely different. That's allowed, but the IRS, they don't want to see you buy a second home where you're just going to basically live in it and keep it vacant all year. That would not qualify, because in the event you did get audited, you have to show your intent. What was your intent? That's what it comes down to. If your intent was, oh, I was going to rent it out, but you never did. You didn't have a lease agreement. You didn't have an agent helping you. You had no agreement or anything like that. That could be audited. You could be audited there for that. So basically, again, qualifying real property, anything that's held for productive use in trade, business, or investment purposes, that qualifies for an exchange property. And then again, here's some examples like raw land. People don't realize that you can 1031 into raw land. It doesn't have to generate income, but again, the intent has to be there that you're buying it to hold for an investor property. Any kind of commercial property, single family residence, multifamily, office, industrial, easements, like oil rights and things like that. You can invest into land that has an oil well on it, believe it or not. Air rights like cell phone towers, water rights. We're talking about vacation homes like short-term rentals. And then fractional ownership. You might have heard of a TIC, a tenant in common group investment, or a DST, Delaware Statutory Trust. Those are where you own a fractional ownership. Those you can 1031 into. I'll make a note here too. Some people have heard of a REIT before. A REIT is not 1031 exchange. You cannot 1031 exchange into a REIT. There's a way to do that down the road, but you can't directly invest into a REIT, because a REIT is considered personal property. It's not real property. So. Okay, so here are some requirements that you have to do, or that you should do, if you want to defer up to 100% of your capital gains tax. So first, you need to reinvest all the cash. So whatever proceeds you have left over from the sale of your relinquished property, those all need to be used, okay? The second thing is you need to purchase equal to or greater than the net sales price. Some people get this confused. It's not what you sold the property for, it's for your net sales price, which is great because you have commissions and closing costs and stuff, and when you sell a property, right? And so the IRS allows you to deduct those out of your sales price and meet the net sales price. And then if there's debt, you must replace the value, either get a new loan or bring in cash to make the difference. This is also a common question I get. People say, well, I hear that I need to get a new loan on my property. You don't have to get a new loan, but you have to replace the value. What does that mean? Well, IRS doesn't care if you get a new loan or if you bring cash. So again, if you have, and I think the next slide we'll talk about the debt, but if you have debt, a loan basically on the property, let's say it's a $50,000 loan that you owe and you don't want to get a new loan on your replacement property, you just need to bring that $50,000 difference to closing basically, or you get a new loan. So here's an example of how this works. So let's say you have a sales price of $1 million, very common in California here, that's like a condo here. And you have non-recurring closing costs of $50,000, your net sales price is $950. Make sense? Then let's say you have a loan for $500,000. Your cash proceeds after all that is going to be $450,000. Let's see what that looks like. So yeah, so if you don't purchase equal to or greater than your net sales price, it's going to cause what's called a taxable boot. So let's say in this example here, my net sales price is $950, but I just didn't want to spend $950. I wanted to buy something for $800. Well, that $150,000 difference will be subject to capital gains tax. So IRS, they pretty much want you to they want you to buy equal to or greater. They want you to kind of go up the scale. They don't want you to go back. If you go backwards, you can, but again, it's subject to capital gains tax. Same thing here with the proceeds. So not spending all the proceeds will cause a taxable boot. So again, your net proceeds are 300,000, and let's say you only spent 200,000 because you want to pocket $100,000. That taxable boot will be $100,000. By the way, you can actually do that. People do ask me to say, well, I want to keep some money set aside. You can do that, but again, it's going to be taxable, unfortunately. So here are the time requirements that you have to really know and be aware of. So these are the identification periods. So you have 45 days, 45 calendar days from the close of your relinquished property to identify your new replacement property or properties. Okay, it's about a month and a half. Then you have 180 days. So basically 135 days later, you have 180 days total to complete the exchange. Okay, those do not change. There's no way to get around that, unfortunately. The only way that you could or could get postponed or give you a longer period of time is if you're in some kind of natural hazard disaster area, like if you're in a massive hurricane or a tornado or an earthquake or a fire, wildfire, anything like that. If you're affected by that, that actually can extend. The IRS usually updates their websites all the time when there's any kind of natural disasters. But other than that, there's no way of getting around this. So. Right, and then along with the identification dates, you actually have to choose one of the identification rules as well within the 45-day time frame. So there's what's called a 3-property rule. So basically, again, there's going to be a checkbox that you have to check. And when you set up an account with us, we send you an electronic form. And on this form, we have spaces for addresses for your replacement properties. And then we have this checkbox here for which method you want to use. So let's go through these real quickly. So the 3-property rule says that the taxpayer may identify up to 3 properties of any value. So this basically says, hey, I'm going to sell 1 property and maybe I'm going to buy 1 more, but I might buy 2 more. I'm not sure. This is a great way to go. The 200% rule says that the taxpayer can identify an unlimited number of properties as long as the total fair market value does not exceed 200%. So let's say and this was based off the sales price, not the net, the sales. It's kind of confusing, but let's say you sold a property for $1 million, that was your sales price, means you couldn't purchase more than $2 million worth of real estate with this rule. This is a really common rule we see when people are going out of California or out of a high expensive area. Maybe they have like $500,000 or $1 million in equity and they want to buy 5 or 6 or 7 properties. This is the rule that you would choose. And then the 95% rule is pretty uncommon, but we do see people take it every once in a while. This says that if you exceed the 3-property rule and the 200% rule, then you have to acquire 95% of the total value of the properties identified. That's a pretty big risk there because you might not want to buy all the properties, but in order to defer your gains, you'd have to. If you don't, any difference again would be subject to capital gains tax. So most likely you're going to either choose the first or the second rule. And again, Vince and I can help you determine which is going to be the best for you. So again, this is just a continuation on the identification rules. Has to be written in writing. Again, we send you the identification form via electronic document, so you don't have to worry about that. Has to describe the property, which is a physical address. It has to be mailed to us or email, basically, or signed by midnight on the 45th day, and has to be delivered to the qualified intermediary, a QI, someone like us. So again, it's pretty simple. We have it really streamlined here, so you don't have to worry about like faxing stuff in or mailing stuff in. We make it really easy for you guys. So this is a great example of what if you didn't do a 1031, because some people say, I don't want to do one. I don't want to have to deal with the timelines, or maybe I just don't want to be an investor anymore. So let's say you had a sales price of $1 million and your adjusted basis was $425. So that leaves your capital gains at $575. And let's say you're paying 33% on that. Look how much you'd have to pay if you were in that bracket, $191,475 in capital gains tax. So when you file your tax return, Uncle Sam, or your accountant, I should say, is going to say, hey, you're going to owe this much. Now, it could be offset a little bit with some expenses, but give or take, that's a big chunk of money. Let's say you had, yeah, go ahead, Vince.
Sorry, Aristotle. I was just going to say this side by side is so important, and being able to see that difference, right? Of like by paying those taxes and then trying to reinvest that capital after paying the tax. Like if you know you're going to buy real estate, the 1031 is kind of a must do. It really helps catapult you into the next property and into the next property, into the next property. And it's such a great tool that we can use. And I think that side-by-side comparison of just having to pay almost $200,000 is really eye-opening.
It is, yeah, very, very good point. So that 191,000 that you would have to pay taxes on, that's like a property you can pay cash for in Tennessee, or that's more. I think that could be 3 or 4 down payments for properties, in other markets, So it's like you're deleveraging yourself basically. You're kind of going backwards if you don't do a 1031. So, and you can see here, you have more money working for you, and your net worth goes up. So it's just really it's a good eye opener to kind of see the pros and cons here. Okay, title investing. So titling is a really big thing when it comes to 1031 exchange, all right? And this is why it's important for Vince and I to learn about your scenario before you actually go into contract and selling your relinquished property, because we want to know how you're holding title, what your goals are, what you're looking for. That way you're not blindsided by all this stuff. So basically the IRS says that the taxpayer who is selling has to be the same taxpayer that's buying. Okay, so just keep that in mind. It's very simple to understand that. So here's some examples here. So John Smith is selling a relinquished property. His name is going to go in title as a replacement property. Very simple. Same thing with an LLC. Let's say there's ROI LLC is going to sell, and then ROI LLC is going to buy. Now, here's another thing that can happen and is completely doable is some people will name their properties with the LLC of the address in them. Let's say it's 123 Main Street LLC, right? But then when they go to buy the new replacement property, they don't want that one. They're going to use a different one, 456, Sesame Street, whatever. And so, but as long as that individual is a single member on an LLC, that's completely fine. Okay, so just want to make that point. Here's a trust. Trust can get confusing to people, but the Lewis Revocable Trust is selling, and then Tom and Linda Lewis are going to just buy as individuals. Okay, same thing with an LLC. They can do the same thing as long as they're the members of that trust or the members of that LLC. That's completely fine. They just don't want to go from Lewis Revocable Trust to Smith, John Smith Trust. That would be a no-no. And title and 1031 exchange companies, we're always communicating when you're selling your property, make sure that title is correct. Frank Campos, so selling the sole member of the Campos LLC, that's completely fine because again, he's a single member of that. Justin Long, 100% ownership of a property that he's selling, and then Justin Long is 20% of a TIC ownership. So that means that let's say he has a net sales price of $100,000 on his relinquished property, Justin Long here, and he's buying a $2 million property, a TIC, and a $2 million, whatever 20% is of that, that would qualify for him. He doesn't have to go basically 100%. And then the next one is, this happens quite often where you have a married couple where maybe the husband or wife is on one of the relinquished properties and then the replacement property, they want to add each other on there. So, so you can do that. So that's important to know, but if you have those questions, again, you can always reach out to me if you want to make sure that that's correct. I know Vince, you reach out to me quite often about those types of things, and it's, it can be confusing, but we want to make sure that you're holding title the right way. And that pretty much concludes the presentation. So Vince, I don't know if you're going to field any of the Q&As, but I guess if anyone wants to open the chat box there and type in questions, or the question box, I should say, type in your questions as we are here. Feel free to type in. It could be even just for Vince, not just for me, but again, any questions for Marshall Reddick as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one question that I get often is, as it pertains to the different rules that you can go about. Oftentimes we're getting folks that own property here in Southern California that are selling here and want to buy multiple properties out of state. if you go with the 3-property rule, can you buy all 3 of those properties? Can you buy 2 of those properties? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, you don't have to buy whatever's on your list except for that 3rd rule, the 95% rule. Then you have to purchase everything. But no, great question. So let's say you're selling one property and you're going to buy 2 or 3. But then, like, let's say you choose the 3-property rule, but then maybe you only end up purchasing 2. That's completely fine as long as you're meeting your requirements. That's kind of what they care about.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
It's just up to 3. Up to 3 is what it says.
Now I get this question a lot too, and not to get super technical into it, but I know there's a lot of folks that own properties with multiple partners, right? So, and I know the vesting of that is a critical component, but is it possible? Can you talk me through a little bit about how someone in California who owns multiple properties, or sorry, a property that's owned by multiple people, how that kind of 1031 exchange process works if they are seeking to sell that, or maybe even go their separate ways? Like maybe someone's going to exchange into one property, someone may exchange into another property. We had a recent example of that, right? That we worked through. That probably good to kind of go over.
Yeah, that's a good question. So let's say there's an LLC and there's 2 partners on it, and one wants to do a 1031 and one, excuse me, and one doesn't, or siblings or something, whatever, right? It's tricky in California. So there's something, I guess we could have made a slide on this too, but there's something called the swap and drop or the drop and swap. You might have heard that before. And unfortunately, in California, if your property is in California that you're going to be selling, California kind of frowns upon this. They don't like the idea of you just dropping one partner off and then selling the property like that. Other states, not a problem. It's just California. I think New York recently just said that it's okay to do that. I think one of the court systems approved something a month or 2 ago about that. But you can't simply just drop someone off title and then do the exchange in California. They don't like that. So really, in California, you have 2 options. And the first option is you remove someone from title. Because, okay, let's say, Vince, you and I were on title of a property, okay? And I want to do a 1031 and you don't want to do that. Well, if I remove you from title, if I did like a warranty deed or a quitclaim deed and I deeded you off that, I technically need to wait 2 years before I sell the property, because California sees it as, hey, I'm a new owner and I haven't owned that property for I've only owned it for a few months, but you're off title. And holding, the IRS wants to see a property that you're selling for an investment property. They want to see that you've owned it for probably around 2 years or more. You might have heard that before too. IRS accountants and CPAs will like to see any property that's held for investment purposes. They want to see it held for about 2 years or greater. If you've only held it for 9 months and you're trying to do a 1031, they're probably not going to like that. So that's kind of like the way they look at it. So that means I'd have to wait 2 years to sell the property, or you do the exchange with both of you on it. Again, this is if you have a property in California, you do the exchange with both of us on there, and then after the 2 years, then you can go off. But you can't just do it readily. It's not that easy. It's not like you can just drop someone off there. Now, there are exceptions to that. So kind of, Vince, like we were talking about a couple of days ago or last week about your client that has a trust. Well, if it's a trust and the siblings are tenant in common, that's completely okay, because tenant in common is a different title vesting than like joint tenancy, or joint tenancy is a very common for like marriage, or just maybe if you have partners, it could be a joint tenant type of partnership. But if it's a tenant in common, then it's usually not a problem to do that. But California just they have these really strange rules about that. So it's called the drop and swap or swap and drop. Again, other states don't care about it. You can do them all the time. You can drop someone off immediately, do the exchange and not have to worry, or do the exchange and then drop them off after immediately. It doesn't matter. But California does have strict rules about that. So I don't know if that answered your question or not.
No, that's super helpful. I have a good question that came in. I am currently in escrow on the sales side on 2 parcels. Both deals are in the hands of the title company. Would I want to get the 1031 exchange process started before escrow closes? This is a really good one for you to kind of hammer home here.
So yeah, you do need to create an exchange account before you close. So I mentioned that in the beginning of the presentation, because once those funds go to your account, like if you receive them, then you are no longer allowed to do a 1031 exchange. So yeah, and we can set up an account the same day. It's very quick here. We don't charge any upfront fees to start up an account. So if you create an account and then you decide for some reason you don't want to do an exchange, then we don't charge you anything. But yeah, you do need to set up an exchange account before you close. And all we really need is your escrow title contact information. And they'll send us a copy of your title report and the purchase and sale agreement for the properties, and that's it. And we can get the ball rolling on that.
Great. And then I have a couple more. And then folks, anybody who doesn't get their question answered, rest assured we will be doing some follow-up calls, and we're happy to specifically get to those. But I see another one. You mentioned that raw land is a type of property. What are the limitations on what you use the land for in the future?
Yeah, so it sounds like, yeah, there's really, again, it really comes down to your intent. So is your intent to hold a property and sell for a profit? Well, that's being used for investment purposes, right? So that's the intent. Or is your intent to, if your intent is to hold on the property and build a primary home on it, well, that can change. However, this is a good, I'm thinking of something as I'm talking about this land thing. This is a really good question that comes up too. People say, well, can I 1031 exchange into a rental property now and then convert it into my primary home down the road? And the answer is yes, you can. Happens all the time. So let's say I had a client yesterday who said, I want to sell a property, but then we want to move into it down the road. Yeah, just wait 2 years, rent it out for 2 years. Have a track record of rent, collect your rent, make sure you're claiming that on your tax return for about 2 years or more, and then you can move into it and claim it as your primary home. Same thing for vacant land. Let's say you buy vacant land and then 5 years later you want to build a home on it and call it your primary home. That's okay.
Thank you. Here's another one. If a 1031 is done on a house in California for a property in Texas, are taxes due in the future to California if the house is sold after several years?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's called the California has what's called the clawback provision, and you can look it up online. Basically, when you move your money and when you sell your property and you move your money out of the state of California, you don't get taxed at that at the time, but and then every year that your property is out of state, which hopefully will be forever, unless you want to move your rental property back into California. But if you leave it out of state, every year your accountant is going to have to file the clawback provision form. You're not paying anything for that, but it's just an extra form that your accountant has to fill out, stating that you did a 1031 years ago, and that the money is still kind of out there. But yes, if you do bring the money, or I should say, if you reinvest that money back into California, you will have to pay that tax, unfortunately.
And if you just sell that in Texas and don't do an exchange, does California have a piece of that?
No, not that I know of.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
I have. We'll do one more here, and it's can you explain how a 1031 is properly used when flipping homes? My client holds them for 5 to 6 months and then relinquishes them in a sale. How does that work with not paying capital gains?
Yeah, so I mentioned that one of the property types that you can't 1031 exchange is a flip. So if you're doing flips and let's say you've held it for 6 or 8 or 10 months and then you're going to sell it, that does not qualify for a 1031 exchange. Now, let's say you bought it for a flip and your intention was to flip it, but then you ended up renting it. As long as you rented it for at least a year, 2 years is better, then you can do a 1031 exchange on that. But you have to show proof. In the event you get audited, you'd have to show proof that you rented it out, right? That you filed, that you had a lease agreement in place. Generally, if you hold the property for just about a year and then you do a 1031, that's considered an aggressive exchange, meaning that you could have a higher chance of getting audited. That's why most accountants and CPAs will say, hey, 2 years or longer is the optimal time to do an exchange. 1 year is pretty aggressive. So, but yeah, people do come up to me who are doing a flip. Actually, yesterday we were at an event, and your colleague Chris had someone ask the same question. They said, well, what if I was flipping a property, but then, you know, in this market, I just couldn't sell it and you rented it out? Well, again, if you rented that for at least a year, 2 years is better, then yeah, then you would not have to pay capital gains tax. But, you know, doing a flip, you have a lot of holding costs involved with that, right? So like, you'd have to make sure that you're not accruing all those costs for that year or two. You'd have to somehow convert it into like a long-term loan if you have a loan on it, right? Because that's going to cost a lot of money. If you can you imagine like having an 8 or 9% hard money loan on a property for a year or 2 years, that would really eat into your profits.
Right. Here's one last one that's an easy one, and then we can wrap up. But what happens if you don't find a property that in the identification period of those 45 days?
Okay. Well, simply put, yeah, if you don't identify something by midnight on the 45th day, then the exchange will fail. And then, yes, you'd have to pay capital gains tax, unfortunately. There's one fail-safe mechanism that you can think about, and that's what's called a DST. So a DST, as I mentioned earlier, it's a 100% passive investment. It stands for Delaware Statutory Trust. And that is where you are a fractional owner of a large commercial property. And you can choose what kind of property you want to be into, you want to get into. It could be an apartment property, a FedEx building, Amazon warehouse, whatever meets your criteria, because you have certain criteria you have to meet. Now, DST, just so you know, you have to be an accredited investor in order to invest, because it's monitored by the securities broker. So you have to be accredited in order to purchase a DST. But DSTs are really fast to identify. You can identify a DST within a matter of a couple of days. We have a couple partners that we work with here at Excel 1031 that we can refer you to that offer DSTs, and they can educate you on them. But it is a fail-safe mechanism. If for some reason you just can't identify anything and you have a large gain, then yeah, you can put it into a DST. A DST, they typically are about a 5 to 7 year hold. So it's not like you can invest into a DST and then a year or two later get out of it. But you can 1031 into a DST, and you can 1031 out of a DST. The nice thing about a DST is you do get monthly distributions like cash flow, just like you would on a rental property. You also do get depreciation, and then you also get the appreciation. So any appreciation that the property makes when they sell the property down the road, if you're still, if they decide to sell at some point and you're involved with it, you would get that equity out of there too. So, so it's almost like owning a property. I find that people who have owned properties for 30, 40, or 50 years or more, and they don't want to be a landlord anymore, but they still don't want to pay the capital gains tax. I find that a DST is usually a really good vehicle for them, for many reasons, but because it's 100% passive, and it's a great way to not have to pay taxes, but also get residual income.
Yeah, that's awesome. Great explanation. And any questions that we missed, I'll be doing some follow-ups, and we can totally go over those in more detail. But I did want to thank you, Aristotle, for joining us tonight and taking the time to answer some questions. And I wanted to thank all you folks out there who tuned in. Here's Aristotle's contact information. Feel free to jot this down. We'll also be, like I said, making some follow-up calls this week or beginning of next week as well. And yeah, we look forward to connecting with everybody. And thank you all so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks, Vince, and thanks, everybody.